My name is Lee Curtis. I'm one of the priests on staff here at Christ Church Cathedral, and it is my great joy to welcome all of you this morning. It is our great honor and our joy to provide a safe and today a dry place for all those who are working for justice here in Indianapolis. Bienvenidos a todos, es nuestro gran honor para tener ustedes aquí en esta catedral. Es nuestra alegría para proveer un lugar seguro y hoy seco para todos que son en la lucha para justicia aquí en Indianapolis. And again, it is our, I won't pray you in this morning, but do know that you are all in our prayers as those working for justice and for change here in Indianapolis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the People's Climate March Community Forum. My name is Lucas Warfield. I will be your moderator today. Today there are gatherings like ours happening across the globe as nations are meeting in San Francisco to conduct international climate negotiations. I want to recognize some distinguished guests in the audience. If you are an elected official official who is here today to rise for climate jobs and justice with our community, please give a wave or stand. Get her, everybody get her. Thank you for coming. We are here because we are concerned about our home and our climate. Here in Indiana, we face a number of crises impacting health, quality of life, climate, and employment. We will hear about many of these today. We are also here because we can be a leader in solving the climate crisis and encourage our elected officials to be leaders in improving our hope and opening up new opportunities for communities to prosper. Indiana releases more climate pollution and greenhouse gases than 185 nations. That's 185 nations, not cities, not states, but 185 nations. Let that sink in. Even here in Indianapolis, our power is supplied by Indianapolis Power and Light's Petersburg coal plant, one of the top 22 worst climate and toxic polluters in the nation. We are gathered here as a community, and we are gathered here today as a community because we need elected officials to lead, to recognize the harm being done to our environment and our neighborhoods. Environmental harm is not only being perpetrated by large corporations, but also by a long history of racist and classist policies. Policies that destroy vibrant and vital neighborhoods, leaving poverty in its wake. If we are here to speak on environmental change, supporting communities of color needs to be the forefront of that discussion. From family homes being destroyed only to make it more convenient for outside residents to enter the city, to entire not being able to access nutritious and affordable food. The weight of pollution and racism is disproportionately harming people of color in our communities. And enough is enough. We are here today because we are Hoosiers. We are here today as Hoosiers because we know we have solutions and tools to solve the climate crisis, and we need our elected officials to support us. We do not need elected officials to ignore the public health crisis that plagues our community. We don't need them to repeal the only standards we have to reduce carbon pollution, to damage the already limited rooftop solar policy. While our elected officials have taken steps to lead on the environment, this is not enough. We need more action. Because of their important role in our communities, we have invited Senator Donnelly and Young, State Senator Randy Heed, State Representative Sharon Nagel, and Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogshead. They cannot come. So this is very important to them. It is shown. But we invited them to show up and give their opinions on this issue. We also invited them to answer our questions, and the only person that did that was Senator Joe Donnelly. And yeah, which is great, you know. I wish he would have shown up, but that's great. You know, our planet is dying. It's okay. Don't show up, it's okay. Planet's only dying. We will persist. Today we will hear stories from speakers and community leaders across the city that they will speak about jobs, justice, and climate change. Are you ready? Are you guys ready? Yeah. Are you guys ready to help solve the climate crisis? Yeah. Are you guys ready to heal our communities and our planet? Yeah. Are you sure? Okay. I'd like to introduce Eric Brooks, Community Co-Chair in Central Indiana Jobs with Justice Great King. Also a member of Union and a member of the Concerned Scientists and Citizens Climate Lobby, who would like to address concerns to our Senator Sherry Donnelly and Young.
Hello. So it's really wonderful to see you all on such a great and wet day. It was really something to see you actually out there marching. It's a tribute to how important this issue is. And I also want to recognize the young people who are here, who are really central to why we're fighting today. It's not just for us, it's also for the coming generations. I am the community co-chair of Central Indiana Jobs with Justice, and my name is Eric Brooks. Jobs with Justice is a coalition of community, faith, and labor organizations and individuals fighting for the needs of working and oppressed communities. Jobs with Justice is proud to rise with you, united in struggle for climate, jobs, and economic and racial justice. We urge all elected officials to take urgent action on human-driven climate change, protecting our health, moving to 100% renewable energy, stopping fracking, ensuring workplace health and safety, and creating local jobs with living wages. We look for policies that recognize and address the disproportionate impact the poisoning of our planet is having on working and oppressed communities. While the seas fill with plastic debris, rise up in unity with all who work to clean and restore our planet to health. Rise up in unity with the farm and factory workers poisoned by pesticides and industrial solvents in toxic workplaces, struggling for health and safety on the job. Rise up in unity with the Black communities of Flint and Detroit, struggling for clean water to drink. Rise up in unity with Native Americans in continuing struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Rise up to ensure the voices of workers and oppressed peoples are heard and heeded in the halls of power as our economy is reshaped around sustainability and green industries. Rise up for avenues by which today's workers and youth can find stable jobs with living wages in the emerging green economy. Call for job retraining, affordable education and new technologies, and policies that prioritize the needs of working and oppressed communities in the transition to a green economy. Everywhere across this globe, and I mean everywhere, working and oppressed people are coming together to protect their children and the children of all humanity from having to live on a poisonous planet. United action can stop the environmental destruction resulting from policies and economic incentives putting profits before people and the environment. Celebrate workers uniting in struggle for a healthy environment and a better life. So this is the fun part. Party with SEIU Local 1 Indianapolis janitors and all workers on September 23rd, 3 to 6 p.m. at the Indiana City Brewing Company, 24 South Selby Street, Indianapolis. It's going to be a wonderful celebration, and you'll get to meet a lot of workers who are in struggle today around issues that are of concern both to our communities and to the environment at large. Together we can stop environmental destruction and repair the damage already done. The people united can never be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you. As they mentioned, I'm Greg Kemp. I'm a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists and the Citizens Climate Lobby, both of which organizations are out there working every day against climate change. So I would fully recommend everybody search out their websites and join if you're at all interested. All right, I'm not used to this, so bear with me. Okay. On May 31st, I had the opportunity to give testimony to the EPA Science Advisory Board concerning their decision to unilaterally roll back the vehicle greenhouse gas emissions. These were part of the fuel economy regulations known as CAFE that had been revised in 2012 after much study and discussion among all concerned parties, including regulators, automakers and their suppliers, and the UAW. Through 2017, automakers have easily complied with these regulations, earning millions of credits to apply in later years if needed. And a recent review by the regulators found them capable of continuing to meet them. The benefits have been significant. Billions of dollars saved by consumers on fuel, greenhouse gases reduced by millions of tons, a drop in imported oil, historic auto sales, employment, and now profits by the industry. The proposed rollbacks are wrong, and I decided to speak out against them. This was my testimony. I'm a mechanical engineer. I had my undergraduate from Ohio State, my master's from Purdue, and I recently retired from General Motors after 37 years of designing automatic transmissions primarily for improved fuel economy. I've been heavily involved with 6, 8, and 10-speed conventional transmissions and electric hybrids. I hold 15 patents in all aspects of their design. My ask was for the board to review the decision to reopen the greenhouse gas standards. The decision wasn't based on scientific grounds and would produce up to 500 million tons of additional greenhouse gases if rolled back. This would be a tragedy for humans, wildlife, and the environment. My first point was that automakers have the ability to comply with the current regulations. This was the finding from 2015 independent and 2016 regulator reviews. Among other things, citing that more technologies are in use than anticipated, and the focus on conventional drivetrains would continue to keep hybrid and electric use low and vehicle prices affordable. My personal experience mimicked this. In 2011, I was working on an electric hybrid design expected to have high penetration in pickups and SUVs to help meet these regulations. But by 2014, it had been eliminated due to improvements in vehicle mass, aerodynamics, engine developments, and 8 to 10-speed conventional transmissions. My second point is the cost of these standards has not significantly affected the vehicle price, which is set by many things, not just fuel economy features. Over the past 20 years, car and truck prices have tracked even to inflation, while all consumer goods have risen 50%. A recent shift to larger, more featured vehicles has driven up the average vehicle price, but the most affordable have stayed constant with inflation, and fuel savings far outweighs any modest price increase from the fuel economy feature. My last point is having fuel-efficient vehicles makes the industry more robust against future fuel price spikes like the one that drove my former employer into bankruptcy 10 years ago. Studies show increased industry jobs from the technologies and fewer lost sales when fuel prices spike again. The board did decide to do a scientific review on the proposal, and it's still in progress. My ask of everyone here today is to voice your concern regarding these rollbacks by going to the website behind me. You can take a picture of it, or you can get to it by the Union of Concerned Scientists website and go to their clean vehicle menu drop-down. We asked Indiana lawmakers about these regulations and had a response from Senator Donnelly. Question: do you commit to supporting policies that cut transportation pollution in line with science-based goals? And will you support policies that will keep our existing strong fuel efficiency standards in place? His response: one of my most important priorities in the Senate has been focusing on efforts to improve the economic well-being of hardworking Hoosiers. Too many hardworking Hoosier families and businesses are finding it too difficult to fill up their gas tanks in order to do simple things like drive to work, make deliveries, or take their children to baseball practice. I want to make sure we continue pushing for technological innovation in a way that saves families money, reduces pollution, and promotes economic growth. Thank you.
Our first panel I'm going to introduce, thank you guys for coming and donating your time. If I do mispronounce your name, I apologize. I am very white and even more crooked. And I don't know which is worse. So without further ado, let me introduce Quran, I'm just gonna butcher everything. Quran, Castoreno-Santana. Why did you invite me? Castoreno-Santana, enrolled member of the Lipan Apache Tribe of Texas, the executive director of the American Indian Center of Indiana, member of the Indiana Kentucky chapter of American Indian Movement, and activist and educator on indigenous culture, history, and contemporary issues. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Matt Davis. Urban farmer and founder of Axiom, and urban farmer and founder of the Axiom Collective. Give it up for Matt. Then we have Dr. Indra Frank, Director of Environmental Health and Environmental Counseling. And then Gabriel, you said it to me, Philip Professor of Science at IUPUI. I will give it up to them. Do you guys have any response? I would like the panel to share their background and response you might have to Joe Diane's comments.
So I introduced myself earlier. I'm Carolina Castoreno-Santana, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Indian Center. I'm also a member of the Indiana-Kentucky chapter of the American Indian Movement. So activism is very much at the root of everything I do in my personal and professional life. And coming from a Native standpoint, like I was saying in my welcome address earlier, this is more than a moral obligation for me. This is a responsibility to my ancestors. You know, my generation we are the survivors of all of the trauma and genocide and oppression that our ancestors have experienced due to colonialism and colonization. So we feel like it is our duty to protect the earth and protect specifically the land that our ancestors died fighting for. So I take matters of environment very seriously. When going over these responses, I feel like it's very typical for politicians to kind of give the bare minimum response. I don't feel like either really addressed the question that was asked to them efficiently. And I think that, you know, it's really great to talk about jobs, but I think that it's more important that they specify that they are interested in moving towards what we're talking about, a green economy, clean jobs. You know, there are tons of jobs to be created if we were to focus on alternative resources, especially like solar energy. So I think that with both responses, I would really like to see them be more specific in their answers and how they are going to move forward to making that more of a reality, because we can't simply worry about, you know, just creating jobs to fill up the gas tank. Well, I think we need to move away from the gas tank is the problem. And make it affordable, because, you know, I think one of the biggest things that activists get when we talk about this is, well, how did you get to where you are today? You drove in a car. You're right, I drove in a car that I can afford. And so if our government, if our legislators were more concerned with making everyday life affordable for the average American, we could all more easily move toward this sustainable way of living. So that's my response.
Yeah, you said background. I mean, I'll be brief. Again, my name's Matt. I'm from Indianapolis, from the east side mainly. Anybody been on the east side? Lots of concrete, lots of pollution, lots of old this, lots of old that, lots of lead this, lots of lead that. You know, so I work in local food, so definitely urban contaminants, pollution, Superfund sites, environmental hazards. It's a big consideration, especially when you're trying to do some more production-oriented type of stuff. You gotta look at projects and look at the environmental assessment. It's really boring, and you figure out how messed up the environment and the soil and the water and everything actually is. And it makes you more conscious of just trying to improve your environment and help raise awareness about environmental issues. So that's kind of my main segue into the environmental justice movement is food. That's been my main, entry into it. And I've worked with a lot of different groups here in town too, volunteer with different people, and been a part of panels like these for a while. I think also I'm just more concerned for just a sustainable future, and similar to what you were just saying, just a just transition at some point, you know what I mean? But there's a lot in between that, because I think we have a tendency when it comes to environmental issues, we want to put it more on the personal responsibility. Like, you should get some recycled toilet paper, or you should, get some other kind of upcycled product or something like that. We try to make it about I'm gonna ride my bike today, even though, it's probably not as practical or something like that. So it's just never something that can make sense and people feel like they can get their hands around and create change. And I think it's important that we start to frame issues that have to do with our environment and our planet that way. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with it. In terms of these responses, I'm not surprised. I feel like politicians, again, are just heavily influenced by money. You know what I mean? And so if everybody in coal and oil and the traditional fuel, economy, if they have the money and they're influencing politics to that degree, we're going to keep getting the same responses. And also what I think is just becoming more and more apparent, especially as we get further and further into the 21st century. I mean, it's 2018, y'all, we're still using gas, It's becoming more apparent that coal and oil isn't as profitable as renewable energy. We all know that now. So you can't keep bringing up these market-driven considerations about how the economy works and how oil, I think we already know that it's a more sustainable future if we have cleaner energy. So I think we're gonna keep getting responses like this until we stand up and we start really engaging, and again, making it more practical for people to feel like they can create change around environmental and sustainability issues. It can't be something that I need a lot of privilege in order to engage with. And I think we have to start to make the issues more practical for just everyday people.
My name's Indra Frank, and I have the privilege of serving as the Environmental Health and Water Policy Director for the Hoosier Environmental Council. I'm a physician. I specialized in environmental health, and I've spent the last 14 years working on environmental issues that impact people's health. Climate change is a huge one. Every environmental issue is also a human health issue, and climate change is not accepted from that. Senator Donnelly's response focuses on economics. Climate change is also an economic problem. I think one of the things that we've all learned over the decades, there are a lot of people here who've been working on environmental problems for a long time, and it's just a basic principle that it is much less expensive to prevent the pollution than it is to clean it up after it's happened. And the health impacts that come with climate change would be an additional burden to our economy. Increased risks of heat-related diseases like heat stroke, increased risks of flooding, increased risks of drought. So different parts of the country seeing different types of extreme weather from the weather instability. Increased risks from the numbers of ticks and mosquitoes that are shifting in their habitats, right? And they can carry infectious diseases. And then there's the health damage or the health risks that come from refugees who are fleeing climate-related issues like flooded areas or droughts, that kind of societal upheaval. So I would encourage Senator Donnelly to remember that all of those things, like the health impact of climate change and the fact that it's cheaper to prevent pollution, those are part of the economics of this issue as well.
30 years ago, I was a Peace Corps volunteer on a small island nation in the middle of the Pacific. This was an atoll, which is basically at sea level. And in the monthly mail ship came our mail, which included a copy of something called the Pacific Journal. It's just a magazine about the Pacific Islands. The headline article in this magazine was about the science of climate change, sea level rise, and the fact that it's going to inundate all these small island nations, including the one that I was a volunteer at, a sovereign nation, in the UN, which was having to buy land elsewhere to relocate an entire population. That was 30 years ago. Same year, James Hansen from NASA was testifying to Congress about the impending peril and the actual already occurring peril of climate change. 30 years ago, same year. Here I am, 30 years later, a climate scientist. And I will tell you that, as Matt mentioned, personal actions make a difference. However, regulations, policies, and laws trump everything. And what I've seen, and I think what we've all seen, and I think I've seen a little bit more as a scientist, is politicians have hijacked science. Politicians have hijacked climate scientists, hijacked the process such that we've had 30 years of nothing going on. These responses we got from the lawmakers are long paragraphs of nothing going on. So thank you all for being here. Enough is all. That's my final statement. Enough. I actually had a chance to yeah, she wanted to ask about the status of that island nation. It's actually 16 inhabited islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The island that I was on, the whole south part of the island is uninhabitable now because sea level rise have fouled their water supplies. This is an island with no running water, no electricity, one truck that worked maybe half the time. They contributed nothing to climate change, but they're the first climate victims.
It's affecting indigenous communities way more than the rich. So, moving on. Thank you for the discussion. Moving on. I would like to invite Kendall Ludwig, the GRNE Solar Project Manager.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Kendall Ludwig, and I'm the Indiana Project Manager for GRN Solar. We're a comprehensive residential and commercial solar installation company with offices right here in Indianapolis. First and foremost, I would like to thank you all for showing up today and showing your support for our environment and letting your voices be heard. What we are doing is of utmost importance. We as a culture are heading down a very dangerous road, and those who are most at risk are the ones that can do the least to protect themselves against the harmful effects of climate change. Along with all of us, underprivileged populations and our children have already experienced the effects of climate change and will certainly continue to experience these effects of our decisions and the decisions of our legislators for years to come. Just as previous year, Indiana legislators signed into law Senate Bill 309, which, if you do not know what it is, it's a bill that was championed by state electric utilities to undercut the solar industry in Indiana. While our neighboring state of Illinois is working to promote renewable energy by requiring that 25% of the utility's energy be produced by renewable means, Indiana has taken a step backwards and placed a cap on how many of its residents can install renewable energy producing systems. Luckily, we're not currently at that cap. But even in the midst of all these changes, the solar industry workforce has grown exponentially. Just this past quarter, at GRE, we're proud to say that we have increased our workforce by 200% over this past year, and that 25% of our jobs are held by minorities. We installed 7,000 solar panels in 2017, and just this month we've hit 5,000 for 2018, and we have a very busy fall ahead, and we're set to surpass last year's numbers. My message is this: we will not let multi-million-dollar monopolies dictate from where we get our energy. We will not back down. We're a resilient people, and we will keep fighting for what we know is right. Not only have solar systems become more affordable, but the price of battery storage systems has also dropped significantly. If electrical utilities are not interested in working with those who seek to make this world in our state a better place, and they will not compensate us justly for the energy we produce, we now have the ability to pull the plug on them and create our own power. We're part of a movement, and I would like to challenge you all to research solar energy options and discuss renewable energy options with your friends and family. Get familiar with the laws regarding solar. Currently, through tax credits and credits from your utility provider, the majority of Indiana residents can receive a significant financial benefit from installing solar for the next 15 years before Senate Bill 309 kicks in full force. If you have the financial means and ability to install, please consider doing so and choose whichever installer you trust. Increasing the visibility of solar will not only help to secure a clean and healthy future for us and for our children, but it will also boost the economy by creating more jobs locally. If you're not currently able to install solar, you can still take part by contacting your legislators. Tell them that you want community solar in Indiana, meaning you want the option to purchase energy from shared community solar fields and not from coal-fired power plants. We will not be legislated out of protecting our environment. We will not be legislated out of providing a better future for our children and for the planet. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kendall. I would now like to introduce Sally Myers, Attica resident who has a question for State Senator Randy Head, State Representative Shannon Nagel, and State Representative Carrie Hamilton.
Is this good? Now? My name is Sally Mullins, and I'm a senior at Attica High School located in Fountain County, Indiana. Our county is like so many across the state and nation in desperate need of good jobs. We're a factory town, so we have seen firsthand what non-green factories will do to people. I know people in town who have severe lung damage from factories that are not properly regulated to be non-pollutive to our area and to our people. We have one of the dirtiest sections of the Wabash. I have seen firsthand what these factories will do to the water. Jobs in solar and wind energy will provide promising fields for people to come from these factories and get cleaner jobs that can take care of them and our environment. Related to this issue, my question is intended for my state representative Sharon Nagel, as well as state senator Randy Head. You made a very foresighted decision to oppose the controversial anti-solar bill, now Senate Enrolled Act 309, recognizing the number of jobs that solar is creating in our state and could create. What factors are holding back fellow legislators from embracing solar public policy, just as they embraced coal public policy in decades past? Since Representative Nagel could not be here today, she sent the following written response. Although I can't speak on behalf of other legislators, I oppose Senate Act Enrolled 309 in 2017 because I felt that it acted as a regressive, premature measure and not data-driven. Indiana energy providers were not close enough to exceed the net metering ceiling of 1% peak summer load at the time, and I would have preferred a study by the IURC to perform a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis to determine the actual effect of net metering on non-solar customers. As a supporter of renewable energy, I recognized the bill was unnecessarily restrictive of the development of solar and alternative energy. Indiana should recognize that solar energy is a growing industry that has the potential to benefit the state economically as well as benefit the environment. We also received the following response from Senator Randy Head's office. Thank you for supporting solar energy, and I feel like my vote against Senate Bill 309 was the right decision. I can't speak for my colleagues, as we all have different reasons for the decisions we make. I tell everyone that the way to persuade legislators is to establish and maintain professional relations with them. Become a trusted resource, someone who communicates at times when they don't want something. Attend town hall meetings and be involved with the process. I have a knowledgeable advocate for solar energy in my district, and I know I can rely on him for objective information that helps me make good choices.
I would like to welcome Perry as state representative for word responsible as well.
Friends, I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words, and thank you for your work today. I have a few thoughts about how we can reverse what happened with 309 and move forward with policies that help us grow green and clean energy. When it comes to building this powerful voice we have, there is a lot of opportunity to grow the voice we have here today. We talk about marginalized low-income communities. I don't believe that today every single mother in those communities understands the impacts of climate change to their children. I don't think a lot of mothers in Indiana understand that impact. Mothers are a powerful voice. There are mothers in the room here, right? Yes? I'm one of them. But we can grow our voice, and we need to think about that strategically and how we grow the climate message in Indiana. Another example, birders. There are a lot of birders in our state who care deeply about the birds, and they're passionate about their time out in the woods looking for birds. There's a strong climate connection to birds and their habitat and threats to birds today. If those folks understood the connection, they would be with us. They might not be in this room, but they would reach out to their legislators when the time comes to call out for us to do the right thing. That's another group that we need to reach out to. Recreational users. Think about all of the Hoosiers that use our waters, that swim and fish and boat and recreate in our waters, our streams, our lakes, our rivers, right? That's a huge population. That's a huge percent of our population. They're not all engaged in climate change, but they should be, shouldn't they? Yeah. Yes. All right. We need to reach out to them better. The ag community. We're seeing incredible research out of Purdue about the impacts of climate change on our really important ag industry in our state. We need to bring that community more into this conversation and make sure that our entire farming community is part of the solution, because it's good for them and it's good for all of us. And then I also want to stress, Dr. Frank talks about the economic impacts of climate change in our state. And we know that there are incredible costs coming because of climate change. We also know there are incredible economic opportunities, right? Yes. Shouldn't we be bringing in, drawing Indiana clean energy manufacturing? Yeah. movement in the right direction on climate change policy at the State House, that's going to make a difference. Let's get more climate resolutions passed, right? Anybody concerned about gerrymandering? I'm glad to hear that. Because gerrymandering hurts our democracy in ways that negatively impact the conversation we want to have at the State House. So every time you reach out to your legislators about climate change, remember the next opportunity to reach out to them about ending gerrymandering with redistricting reform, you need to do that outreach too. It's just as important. Finally, voting. We're told, we legislators are told that environmentalists don't vote. And in fact, the national data shows that out to be true in many cases. We need to change that. I know that you all vote, right? There's a table back and make sure you're registered, think about how to get your friends registered, get activated in that way. I encourage you to stop by there again. In 2014, for the last midterm election, we have a midterm coming up in, I think it's 58 days. The last midterm election in 2014, Indiana had the lowest voter turnout in the country. We were the bottom of the state in voter turnout. We need to turn that around, and you can help me part of the solution to that. Building this voice on election day is a powerful part of how we're going to get to make change in the State House. I failed to mention that, give you background about me. So let me just share that I've worked in the environmental field for 24 years. And in fact, 24 years ago right now, I was a new college graduate, graduate of IU, Bloomington, interning at the Youth Environmental Council. And at that time, great, yeah. And my friend Jesse is a good director of the Environmental Council, of course. And I'll share that there were kind of two big things I worked on. I learned a lot and became very fired up about the economic, environmental, and quality of life benefits of walkable communities, of mass transit, of building more people-friendly communities. I also learned a lot about coal ash pollution, and that's certainly tied to the conversation we're having today. All environmental issues tie back to climate change. We need to remember that and engage people in all of those different ways back to climate change. I'll just end with this. This is important. Being here today is important. Let's keep building. We can make change. Show up on election day. Keep fighting. Keep building. And thank you again for letting me be here today.
Give it up again for Carrie. She was the only brave soul to face us today, so we appreciate it. Do you guys have any thoughts about what Carrie said, or what has been asked, the question that was asked?
One thing I wanted to bring up today, I didn't exactly know if it was going to be in response to the senators or anything anyone else had to share, but it's just there's a huge connection between climate change and disaster and capitalism. And it's just really, really, really blatant right now, like very blatant. Because in America and other parts of Europe, especially in America, we're seeing capitalism die. You see what I'm saying? We're seeing in China, especially in China, I think it's a really, really great example. Capitalism is alive, it's thriving, it's in a hyper industrial phase of it, and they're using renewable energy to do that. And so as capitalism is dying here, and we're trying to capitalize on disasters that come up, or we're not gonna, look at Puerto Rico, look at what's about to happen to the rest of the Caribbean, look at what's happening to islands that are just off of, the coast of the Americas, not just the Caribbean. Even my father's side of my family is Gullah, so the Gullah Islands, the Sea Barrier Islands, it's not gonna be there long, right? So, but we're trying to capitalize off of that here when renewable energy is being used in a whole different way to build a whole different future elsewhere in the world. And we're being left out of that while our insane approach to trying to survive isn't working. So I just think that that's major, and that's definitely macro, but that relates again back to the everyday level of jobs. Like, there's no way that we're gonna be able to have an economy if we can't really shift. You're not gonna have the jobs. It takes a few industries. Think about it, like so many people here in the Midwest, it was a few industries that were fueling the good jobs. Auto industry, manufacturing, it didn't take a whole lot, but there's so many different sectors within the green economy, so many different ones, that people can have real living wage jobs. And so I feel like, there's no way we can't ignore what we're doing as a country, as a whole, and putting it all on our personal responsibility and choices and, our everyday, like, toilet paper choices. I mean, this is definitely, if we want to get it to jobs, we have to talk about fundamental issues that have to do with our economy. And so I definitely want to bring that up.
So I first want to thank Representative Hamilton again because it speaks volumes just showing up. Thank you. This is a midterm year, so you would think that our elected officials would be a little bit more concerned about what we think about them and want to come here and, give us their platform, but politicians, so. But no, it really does. It's not just bravery, but it shows a dedication to wanting to, hear the will of the people and work with the will of the people to get things done. So I really do appreciate that. But something in reading the responses from these state senators and representatives and listening to the response, if you notice there's a stark difference between what we heard from Senator Donnelly and Young, and that's why it's really important to get involved at the local level. I think that more often than not, a lot of people in this country think that election time is governors and president. That's really all they care. Governors, maybe senators, but governors and presidents. Most people come out for the big elections, but again, we don't turn out for the midterm elections. And that is what is causing the pain at home. We can feel the pain across the country, but we're having pain at home. And Indiana has a history of voting against its own interest. So driving home that need to vote, I know that personally our organization recently, we just found out we're receiving a grant to increase voter turnout in the Native American community, and this is for urban Indian communities across the country. Thank you. So I'm going to get to work really hard this week and probably reach out to a lot of you to help us get some rallies and events going to make sure that happens, because it is so important. And when you think about who is in charge at the local level, these are the people who you're more likely to get in contact with. Senator Donnelly may not always answer our calls. The governor is not always going to hear us out with what we have to say, but these local representatives are more likely to do that. But that's also why it's so important to consider way earlier what you want from your elected officials. We can't just sit here and wait for Senator Donnelly and Senator Young to give us the answers we want to hear. We need to remind them that there is such thing as a primary, and that needs to be taken into consideration because somebody who is more willing to do something for the people will come along. A lot of what is happening with climate change, a lot of us have talked about it today, is disproportionately affecting the poor and the marginalized, especially communities of color. When I think about the pipelines, it's not just the pipelines that we are dealing with. While everything was going on in Flint, Michigan, simultaneously, the Navajo Reservation was experiencing the same thing, contaminated water. Natives are often left out of every equation when it comes to public discourse. We remain invisible in many ways, and that's one of the things that I myself try to combat, is just to even say that we exist. Our existence is political. Our existence is radical. And just to show that we've been able to survive everything that we've been through is a form of resistance against the current government. any government, no matter what time it is. So, but the pipelines, we see this. This is all native land, but they are specifically tearing through native sacred territory, and it's not just the Dakota Access Pipeline. We went through this with the Keystone Pipeline. There are so many issues going on in Canada and how all of this relates to social factors. Native American women experience rape and assault at a higher rate than any other ethnic group in the country, and that can directly be tied to the man camps and the people who are working in the oil fields and where we have an epidemic called missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so climate ties into little things like that that we don't even think of. And I think that, I'm trying not to ramble here, but this is very important for everyone to be just more aware of how you are affected, but also how other people are affected. Many of us who come from, lower economic backgrounds may not have been able to afford simple things that we take advantage of. I hear people criticizing others all the time for not recycling. Well, once again, this is not what we do on the individual level. Recently, we saw the move to ban plastic straws, which, that's great. We should get rid of everything that's made from those products. But are we thinking about the disabled community and how that is very much, that's an important tool for them. So what are you offering in response? Are you going to offer some straws made out of an alternative resource to every single disabled person? And that's why I want to bring it back to Representative Hamilton. In those questions, we heard, yes, we rejected the law or we voted against the law for X, Y, and Z. But how many people are willing to put forth a plan that's going to kick that back and move forward? Because now we're dealing with this. We see where the money goes. The money goes against what we need. The money goes into preventing legislation that is going to help us, help our communities. So I would like to see more politicians and state representatives and even, well, we're not going to see it at the executive level, but not this year anyway, but more people in those positions say, not only am I against this, but here's my plan moving forward, and can you join me and let me hear your ideas? So again, I just want to say voting is very crucial. We may not always like who's on the ballot, but that should be motivation even more to get involved earlier in the election cycle, so we put the people on the ballot who deserve to be there and who are going to take care of our interests. That's what I wanted to say.
I want to say one more quick thing about, definitely as we are putting more progressive candidates into seats across the country, it's really, the pendulum swing is really interesting to watch. I feel like it's exciting too, right? You've been definitely on the other side of that pendulum for a minute now. But I feel like one thing that's really important is making sure that we're thinking about comprehensive policy and comprehensive long-term strategies, not just like interesting projects or kind of isolated examples that have to do with the liberal bubble of wherever you live at. And you can happen to pull it off because you live on the coast or you happen to live here or this college town or whatever. That's what we normally see. And I feel like we need to use the momentum that we're seeing towards progress to more comprehensive things like, you heard some candidates talking about a Green New Deal, you know what I mean? The last New Deal, we know what was going on, and we're at that same moment. We're facing similar realities of depression right now. I mean, we're saying everything but that, but that's what we're in, and we need something like that. But when we do it, it needs to be, we say just transition, but is everything that's coming out of that going to continue to privilege people who are white and middle class? Are these going to be the leaders of industry in the green economy? Are these going to be the people who are shaping policy in the green economy? You see what I'm saying? So if we're not thinking about it now, then guess what? The same thing is going to play out the same way. It's just going to be green. And so I think we need to be very deliberate about that and hold every one of ourselves accountable first. Because again, this work is not for us right now, it's for people who are going to be living in the future that we are creating right now. So.
Thank you guys. And thank you for bringing up these stories. Appreciate that. All crippled people don't hate turtles. That's That's not true. That's not true. You don't need turners. Now I would like to introduce Alvin and Gila from the Kepler Institute. They are going to talk to us about, they will talk. And I will let them talk.
How are y'all doing? I like to do a little social experiment. So, if everyone could, we are live streaming the talk right now on Indiana Beyond Coal. So if everyone could take just 10 seconds if you have a smartphone, if you could pull it out and go to Facebook and share the live stream. We want to see if we can take it from one viewer to see how many we can get. Just take about 10 seconds to do that before we get started, so we can spread the talk to everybody. And while you're doing that, I also want to shout out our KINU Media crew who's here. So, Chio, you want to introduce yourself real quick? Just say hi. Okay, and that's Chio, and then we got Chin over here. Can you raise your hand? All right, so they are both work with KINU Media, which is one of our social enterprises, which builds websites, does social media and videography work, as part of, one, telling our story about the kind of stories and empowering stories that we want to tell in our communities, as well as providing an income stream for our organization to continue the kind of community work we do. Yeah, so the address for the live stream, just go to Facebook and then go to Indiana Beyond Coal. That's the Facebook page. The live stream is on there. You'll find it at the top of the page. All right.
So I come here not only as a Hoosier, but as a granddaughter of rubber plantation workers of the Global South and farmers. And so for us, climate change is not only affecting communities in the United States, but globally, particularly, as other panelists have said, in states and nations who often contribute least, but are impacted most. And I wanted to start out with a quote by Grace Lee Boggs, an activist and community organizer out of Detroit. She once said, "People are aware that they cannot continue in the same old way, but are mobilized because they cannot imagine an alternative. We need a vision that recognizes we are at one of the great turning points in human history when the survival of our planet and the restoration of our humanity require a great sea change in the ecological, economic, political, and spiritual values. The consequences of climate change are at our doorstep. From the fires ravaging in California to the intense floods in Kerala, India, we are reaping the deadly seeds that our culture and economy has sown. We may not even be able to reverse the effects of climate change, but we can no longer continue our path of extraction, exploitation, and destruction. It is not a suggestion, it's a demand. It is necessary for our survival as a species that we center our solutions in a human-centered framework that is not profit-driven, and that we take the lead of grassroots communities of colors and indigenous communities locally, regionally, and internationally. And to start having these honest and deep conversations with ourselves and each other. And as grassroots communities of color, particularly in the United States and globally, for us, fighting climate change and environmental justice also means addressing state violence that we face every day. It means addressing the violence of our communities that we have faced historically and continue to face that has led us to this moment. The same violence and culture that led to the genocide of indigenous peoples in the Americas, to the violence that facilitated and continued chattel slavery, mass incarceration, and the exploitation of Black communities in this country and Latino communities as well. Institutions have already decided that communities are disposable. Flint still doesn't have clean water. Just to repeat, Flint still does not have clean water. And as Carolina has so eloquently put, people in indigenous communities are still fighting to this day to fight against pipelines that are going through their communities, poisoning their waters, and desecrating their sacred lands
from the bayou to the mountain highlands in Canada to the South America, we must take not just a principled stand, but a courageous stand. And we also have to address that false solutions like carbon taxes and carbon pricing that are supposed to decentivize corporations do not effectively address the root of the fossil fuel economy and the need to keep it in the ground, or even large-scale geoengineering techniques such as stratospheric aerosols injections that have immediate and long-term impacts on environment and communities. We must look to the principles of just transition that looks at how can we transition away from the current model of extraction and exploitation to sacred and renewable that really centers our voices and our solutions on the ground. We must return back to community-based solutions and that are defined by core environmental justice principles, such as traditional ecological knowledge, mutuality, solidarity, and intersectional inclusion. We cannot leave any community behind in our fight for climate change. We cannot render Native communities invisible. We cannot ignore the pleas of communities of color as they're asking for them to stop being killed every day. Our solutions must be rooted in a transformation of how we treat each other, that we go from thinking of ourselves solely as individuals and think of the collective, and that we do not leave anyone behind. Unfortunately, in our mainstream environmental movements, communities of color have always been ignored. And oftentimes, when we are talked to or asked, we're added as an afterthought or a nice diversity brochure. So I task you to not just monetarily support, but physically support the work that communities and organizations like the American Indian movement are working on, that people like Sharana Moore with Lawrence Community Gardens doing great work trying to feed her community out in Lawrence to address food desert issues. Groundwork Indy, Falega Highwatt, Denise Abdul-Rahman with the NAACP Indiana chapter of the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee, and others I may have failed to include. I implore you to resource their work and support them. Thank you.
So I want to start by just showing gratitude first, and have everyone just take a few seconds to think about someone in your life who inspired you to be where you are today. Someone who inspired you to want to make a change in the world and not just accept things for how they are. So just take a second to picture that person in your mind. So I want to start by thanking first my family who are in the audience. So I got my mom in the back, my sister Jenny, my mom Betty, my niece Elle, and my brother Alex, who are all here, who have helped support me and to become the person I am today. And for that, I love you and thank you. So I'd also like to thank and show gratitude to my community at Kepler Institute. And we haven't said much about it, but Kepler Institute is a community empowerment organization with an emphasis on empowering young people and community to become the leaders that we need to create the future and create a different future than what we have now. And we do that through environmental issues, through social entrepreneurship, through storytelling, through food and all kinds of things. But if you want more information, it's online, kepra.org. That's KHEPRW.org. So there's really 3 points that I want to talk about and have you walk away with today. And the first is about race, the environmental movement, and root causes. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that it's our responsibility to make the world fairer, not our leaders. And number 3 is that we have to change ourselves and build relationships to create the future. So those are the 1, 2, and 3. So I'll start in on the first one, which is about race, the environmental movement, and root causes. So take a second just to look around at the people around you. So I think one thing that that you might notice is that the diversity of the people here don't necessarily represent our community and the broader community. So I think that there's always, and Gila touched on it, that there is a tension and a divide between a predominantly white environmental movement and then other communities and people who care about things and are passionate. So why is that divide there? What is at the root of the divide? So I would say that a big part of that is looking at and that kind of leads into some of my experiences. So I've been working with Kepler Institute for 7 years now, and before I started working in a community that's very diverse, but is rooted out of the African American community and came out of the African American community. That I came in with I was raised with the understanding that the world is overall fair. That if something is wrong or something happens that's bad to somebody, that, well, there must be some law against that. You know, there must be someone who's responsible for correcting it. And I think that through the mentorship of people at Kepler Institute, and I want to mention a couple, which is our elders, Paulette Fair, Pambana Uishi, and Imhotep Adisa, who through their actions and their example show us what it means to be committed to working for a different future. So I think that I realized that was not the case, and that there are communities and people who aren't raised in predominantly white communities aren't raised with that belief that the world is fair. And in a sense, that is a painful realization, because then how do we move forward? If the world is just chaos and violence, and particularly some of the things that helped me realize that is looking at the history of this country and of the United States, which was founded on slavery and the enslavement of Africans brought to this continent, the stealing of land and genocide of the indigenous people here, and that there is a continuity between how the country was created and the institutions, the laws, the distribution of resources that we have today. So that we have to, in order to really look at environmental issues, we have to understand what the root causes are. And I think one reason that environmental issues don't resonate with communities of color is that it feels like it's looking at the surface. We just need better regulations on air pollution, we need to reduce greenhouse gases, but really fundamentally, it's about how we treat each other and how we exploit resources, exploit land, and exploit people. And that if we're ever to have an understanding with each other, we have to get rid of this assumption that the world is fair. And then realize that we have to learn and start from scratch. So that's for 1 and 2, it's our responsibility to make the world fairer. And the third is to change ourselves, build relationships, and create the future. So once we realize that what we have grown up believing, what we've been taught in school, is not reflective of reality, we have to take the responsibility to broaden our understanding. And I think the number one way we do that is through relationships. So building relationships with people who don't look like you, who don't necessarily believe the same things you do, don't have the same lived experiences as you. And really to have the courage to reach out across those divides. And if you don't know where to start, finding places, events, and even starting today to reach across that and to broaden our understanding. Some other resources that I think are helpful for educating ourselves are Grace Lee Boggs is a good example. She wrote a book called The Next American Revolution, which I definitely would recommend, that really talks about, in order to create the future, we have to evolve ourselves and change our culture. And another one is The Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is an article in The Atlantic. Again, that's The Case for Reparations, which really ties and makes the connection between enslavement to Jim Crow to housing discrimination to mass incarceration in today. So those are two good places to start. And that, yeah. Anything else? Yeah, so I think that will be it.